Hello, St. Lucia. It is lovely to be here today and to have an interesting program about tracing our family roots. This is brought to you through the National Archives Authority of St. Lucia. I am so excited because we are celebrating 30 years since the archives was established, and this took place on the 24th of October 1993 through our National Archives of Authority Act number 16 of 1993. Today, we are very happy to host a program where we shall look at how the National Archives could help you trace your family trees to find out exactly who you are, where you originated from, and who your extended family members are. Some individuals have used the archives, and later on in the program we shall hear from them as they tell us their experiences using the records at the National Archives. We shall begin by talking with Mrs. Tricia Edward, who is our genealogist at the National Archives. She has a postgraduate diploma in genealogy, and she is the go-to person to deal with genealogy. Yes, Tricia, could you tell us which records at the National Archives is most beneficial in helping our clients find out about their families?
Okay, when tracing your family history, you go to primary sources, which would be the births, marriages, burials, and deaths. At the archives, we have more old parish records, which would be the baptism, the burials, and the marriages. But out of the three, the most important one would be the marriages, because they would give you both the paternal and the maternal line. When you come to the National Archives, you would have passed through the Civil Status Registry or the High Court, or even your church presbytery, or whatever denomination you may be. They would have their office and you would have passed there. By the time you get to the National Archives, you should be either in the 1800s to the early 1900s, because that our records start from like 1785, mainly for Soufrière, but most parishes would be from the 1800s up to about 1918, and it varies from parish to parish because we have had fires and some records have been destroyed. So we have a few gaps in the different parishes. Sometimes you do not know when the person was born or got married or died. So you may have to check, High Court records, which would be declarations of successions, probates, letters of administration, court cases, stuff like that, where you may find information about properties, lands, etc., or you might find an actual marriage record or burial record for a family member as an exhibit in a court case file. So that would assist you in getting information. So these are the records that we go through. We go through civil status records and high court records, which would be the land records as well.
Yes, so when we look at the family trees as they are traced, one of the main things would be the names. Isn't that so?
Oh, yes.
The names, because names would lend legitimacy, names would show succession.
Yes.
Names would help put people in a particular place at a particular time. Now, can you tell us, because at the archives, I know we have some problems when it comes to names.
Yes.
Could you tell us some of the problems that we encounter when it comes to names?
Well, names, that's a big problem, not because of the archives, because of our own history. And a lot of persons may have the same surname, but they may not be related, because we took on the first name sometimes of our ancestor as our surname. And knowing that the French history, well, our French history, the French would normally put the surname first and then the Christian name after. And because of that history, we have that problem in St. Lucia where you would find a child having, some children having their father's first name as a surname, some would have their father's surname as the surname. So you'd find in one family, there are two surnames. So some children have that and the others would have the other one. Also, there were a lot of aliases and pseudonames and Norsavan, like we say. So persons may know you as Ma Thomas, right? And they would not know what your first name was. Or, you know, they would have all kinds of Kume, all kinds of names. They call one another Pot, all kinds of strange names where you would hear in the community. And they would never even know the first name. They used to call my grandmother Matifi, and you don't know the grandmother's name at all because that's what you grow up hearing. So it's hard to find that name, but once you can find a record showing, like perhaps the person would know that their grandparents were married, so we trace the marriage record to find the proper name for the person.
Yeah, that I brought up the names because it is so important. In one family, you might find maybe the third child maybe carrying the first name of the father.
Yes.
And all the others carry the real surname. And something else too, you find the priest would accommodate the plantation owners who were the white people, and they had children by the servants and other, I'll call them lesser individuals, and they would allow these individuals to have the babies and carry the first name of the plantation owner. So our history is very interesting.
Yes, and also the spelling phonetically have so many variations of names that, you know, sometimes the way it was pronounced or the way it sounded, maybe the patois version of the name may have the priest writing it differently. So you may find that in a family, that one name is spelled so many different ways over time.
Yes. So this is what it is at the archives. When you come to us, we assist you by giving you information which we glean from our records. And as Tricia said, our civil status records are extremely important because from these records, these are legal records, we get more or less information which we and the clients would be assured are the true records of the ancestors. So Tricia, thank you very much for helping to put into perspective the records that we have at the National Archives that can assist our researchers who want to find out about their ancestors, about the individuals who were the ones who were instrumental in building up their families.
Yes.
Let's put it that way.
Yes.
Do you hear what I hear? Listen to the ocean, and you will hear a cry for help. The ocean is hurting, and we are the source of the hurt. But we can stop and start to heal our ocean by preventing pollution from getting into our waterways. It can start with you. Join an active organization, or better yet, make a personal commitment. Commit not for just one day in the year, but for the rest of your life. Let's dispose of our plastic and other waste responsibly, and let's start building resilience. Let the healing begin.
This message is brought to you by the OECS Commission with funding from the Government of Norway. Remlit, tackling ocean pollution from turf to surf.
There are some people who need no introduction because they are so well known. And I have one of these individuals here today with me, Mr. Calix George Jr. And he's one of our researchers. He has used the records at the National Archives to do research into his own family tree. Hello, Calix.
How are you doing, Margot? Thanks very much for having me and bringing me on board.
Yes. And I would begin by asking you, what challenges did you find when you tried to trace your family tree?
Well, thanks for inviting me on board, Margot, and congratulations to the St. Lucia National Archives as it celebrates its 30th anniversary. And I should also say that the archives was part of my journey to love history from the very beginning. And I think back to when I was in St. Mary's College and the archives put on the National Schools History Quiz and competition.
Yes.
And I participated in that on some consecutive years, and it was really, really great to be able to participate and to learn so much about St. Lucia's rich but unfortunately not very well known history. And I think the archives is such a valuable, or should I say invaluable, institution to St. Lucia and to its future development. And I say future development because in as much as we think about it being a place, a repository for old documents and papers, it really can reveal so much about ourselves. And I think it is something that we certainly do need to treasure as we move forward. I know a lot of people go to the archives when they have land matters. It's usually about, going in and looking to see if they can get some proof of property and assets and that kind of thing. But I really think that as St. Lucians begin to know more about themselves and to try to trace that journey of self-discovery and self-awareness and identity, that they're definitely going to see the other values, the other deep impact that, cultural impact that the archives can actually have on itself. As to what you asked me in terms of challenges, you mentioned it earlier on, Tricia mentioned it, the fact that of course we do have some gaps in our information, and that is because of, again, of our history. Castries has had like about 5 fires over its history, and each time you have loss of information. And I think that sometimes impacts the opportunity to be able to trace information, and as well, no doubt, the need to be able to support the archive so that it can become a modern 21st century institution, to ensure that it has the capacity to digitize all its records, because God forbid we have another conflagration or some sort of disaster, and it's so really important that we can ensure that that information is put in the cloud or put into the IT space, so that people can have them in St. Lucia but also throughout the St. Lucian diaspora around the world.
Yes, and I'm happy you mentioned the cloud, because actually what we have been doing, we have been saving our records to the cloud. And I hope there are no rainstorms in that cloud. We have been saving our records to the cloud to ensure that we have the records. Because I am very passionate about our people and getting to know themselves and appreciating themselves. Because I personally believe that if we knew more about where we came from and who we are, we would be more, not only vocal, but we would be able to stand and defend our country. We'd be able to defend ourselves. We'd be able to speak positively about our people. Anyhow, Calix, as you were doing your family tree, were there any surprises in your as you trace your family, and did you find out that you were related to many people who you had no idea existed?
Yes, I would say so. And that's the nature of really history, because you get oral history, and I think most families will have some passing down of connections to how they were connected. But sometimes parts of those stories get missed out, or
Yes.
sometimes you'll find that the people have never got an opportunity to pass it on. I think one interesting one was with my great-grandmother, a lady by the name of Anna Zilta Senpri. And she and her connection with her father, it appears, in fact, that what may have happened was that her mother died at childbirth. And I thought that was really interesting because you never got that story coming down. But when you actually get into the records and look at the dates, you then realize that is likely what in fact happened or shortly after giving birth. So you definitely do find a lot of these types of treasures. You have a lot of challenges too in terms of the names, because you'll find in very many families the names repeat themselves. So like in the case of my family, there's John Todd is a name that you'll have about 3 or 4 successions of John Todds. And then you sometimes have to think, who are you referring to? This one, so you're going to have to be very meticulous in terms of getting that information. And yes, you will find out a lot of different connections. It gets even more complicated too, because we're such a migrant people. We've been moving around so many different places, and so sometimes you may find the baptismal record in St. Lucia, but maybe the death might be somewhere else, or the marriage may be somewhere else. So what I would say is that the archives should be your first go-to place, so that you can then begin to set the stage for a lot more research which you may have to find. But you should not be despondent when you may find a gap or two in some instances.
And if I may ask, how far back were you able to go?
So thus far, like for instance on my mother's side, I was able to trace my mother's 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 mother. And they came from St. Pierre in Martinique in, I think about 1869, 1870. They were married in Martinique, and they in fact came to St. Lucia shortly afterwards. And thankfully the marriage contract still exists. It was lodged in St. Lucia. So the record is here as well. And other information like wills, for instance, you get a lot of information from the wills too in terms of the names of the children. And sometimes you'll find other interesting traces. You may find that one of them left to go to Brazil, or they left to go to Guyana, so you'll find that not all the traces will be able to yield everything immediately, as I mentioned, because people were so, transient at that time. So that, as of now, I would say somewhere around there. There are other records, even beyond the civil status records, that you may sometimes find information coming out of, like the gazettes. You may see a mention of a name in the family, and you can actually look to that so you can see where they may have come from. So for instance, I mentioned John Todd. There's an early reference to him in the 1820s coming from Barbados. As to that, that's the same name, it's the same person. But then again, that's where you have to do a lot more, and hopefully what can happen moving on, even beyond this, the civil records, for a national genealogy project, looking at the other aspects of the science that's now available, DNA, that people can now utilize to begin to create that full picture of their identity.
Oh, this is so interesting, Calix, and there is still more to come. There is so much that we could find out. So what you have shown us is that there are linkages with the other islands, with other countries, and we will have to have those linkages concretized.
Yes. Yes.
And it's a good thing we have our national archives, International Council on Archives, where the archives are all joined. So it will be easy for me to call the National Archivist of Brazil, that's Anna, whom I know, Yes. So we could try to find out the National Archivist of Martinique, It's a good thing we have these linkages.
And I think a lot of St. Lucians will find that some of the records of their own family may very well have to tie into Martinique because of that very strong connection.
So very true. Yeah. Thank you so much, Calix.
Thank you very much, Margot. Thank you very much.
It was so lovely having you to speak with us, and we're going to talk some more, and we now go to a break.
Suicidal thoughts, like other mental health challenges, can affect anyone. It can be you, your colleague, family member, or neighbor. Everyone has a role to play in preventing suicide. Know the warning signs. If you or someone you know is in crisis or emotional distress, call the suicide hotline at 203. Remember, help is available. This is a message from the Employee Assistance Program, Department of the Public Service. Contact us at 468-2269 or 468-2260.
Our next guest is Ms. Martha Blanchard, and I've known her for quite a while because she began to do research at the National Archives in the early 2000s. And as a researcher, she has a very nice story which she will expand on as we go along with our program. But I just want you to know that she had a photograph. And when she came to the archives, her quest was to find out why her grandmother was not in the photograph. And this was the beginning of her genealogical journey. Hi, Martha.
Hi, how do you do?
I am fine. Can you tell us something about this very important photograph and your quest for your grandmother and the fact that you ended up even writing a children's book about this particular photograph?
So first off, I want to say thank you, Margot, for having me here on behalf of my family, the Blanchard family, and myself. Many years ago, there was a photograph circulating in the family. My brother had that, a copy of that photograph, and as a young woman, I studied it, and then I realized, as the family members were saying who the different people were in the photograph, I realized that the mother of all the children in the photograph was not there. And so that began my quest to find out where was she and what had happened to her. The photograph was of my great-grandfather and my grandfather and his siblings. So that's my aunts and my grand-aunt and my grand-uncles. When I began the search, I asked an elderly cousin of mine, what about our great-grandmother? What do you know about her? Mm-hmm. And she was not too sure because she was born in the U.S. Her father, who was my grand-uncle, had migrated to the U.S. in the 1920s, somewhere around there. Anyway, I continued my search. I said I'm going to find out who she was, and I went to the archives. And when I got there and I began the search, trying to find out about the marriage. So I was looking for the marriage certificate, birth certificates. And that's where I found out her name. I found her name. And it was just so shocking and emotional to hear of my grandmother, to know her name. And it was never mentioned. My father never mentioned her name. But I went back to this cousin of mine. I said to her, this is who I found. She said, yes, that's her. That's my grandmother. And so it just stirred me, and I got excited, and I said I had to get everything. I had to get all the information. And I went back as far as 1775, because then the name, her surname, was not known. She was not signing. There was no connection to Blanchard. It was Massilor. So I wanted to know where the Massilor came from. And the Massilor was her father. And the Massilor was the French estate owner from southern France. And on her husband's side was the Blanchard, and he was a descendant of the French estate owner from southern France. So the two French families married each other. And in doing the research, I found out the Blanchards and the Massilors kept marrying each other over a number of generations, down to my great-grandfather. And so That's when I found out who she was, and then in doing the death certificate, finding the death certificate, I found out she had died very young. And my great-grandfather brought up his children on his own. He didn't marry again.
This is such an interesting story. You know, it's so interesting to see that you could spot that there was something missing in the photograph, and you could actually trace to go back to 1775. Remember, that's around the 1776, the American Revolution. Oh, tracing your family tree has been exciting for you.
Absolutely.
I know that. And could you tell us some more about the other, I'll say, branches of your family, the African branch and so on, that has motivated you?
Absolutely. Well, first off, the focus, the location that came out of the research was that of Micoud, Vieux Fort, and Soufrière. These were the primary areas on my father's mother and my father's father. And when we researched the estate, we researched the physical estate, meaning that the French estate owners, and when they purchased the lands and when they purchased the slaves, you know, and all the documentation that went with that, and how much it costs to purchase everything. And in that document, it details the slaves, and it details their looks, what they look like, what names they had, if they were African names, what part of Africa they were from, or if they were born Creole, and all of that is in the document. And when we found my grandmother's father, we found him, that's the Massey law sign, and then we found his mother. And all of that is in the birth certificates, which we found also. And that's where we found the link between his mother, because we didn't have her full name, but we had her African name. We knew what estate she grew up on. She grew up in. We knew that she was working on the estate, and we linked her to the woman who was in the house, and we found her African name, which is on that deed of sale, or whatever you want to call it, that when they purchased the estate, the French purchased the estate. Her name was very clear, and based on the name, I took the name that I found, and I went to the Africans to find out, is this an African name, and what part of Africa is it from? And when I did that research, it said that the link was Nigeria, but it was Benin. Now there's an African state called Benin, so I'm assuming it's Benin, the African state, but there's a Benin in Nigeria. And I had been told before that my links, based on what was coming out of Micoud, was Nigeria. So when I found her name, I did the research on the name to see if it was connected to a tribe, and I found out that it was connected to Benin, Nigeria, and that very likely she's from that area. And so that's how I found the African heritage, the African link through her.
Yeah, and I must say that Benin, Togo is one of the countries that quite a few of our St. Lucian ancestors were from.
I see.
Yes. Martha, it's so nice having you here, but we have to come to a close. But before we do this, I would just like to tell our viewers that this is a sample of a family tree book. If you want to trace your family, you could either buy a family tree book, and it will show you how you look for your mother's side of the family, your father's side of the family. You got the photographs, you got the deeds, you got the other records. But if you don't have time, you cannot get a family tree book, you could make one for yourselves, where you have your mother's side of the family, your father's side, and so on. And this would aid you in completing your genealogical tracing of your family. Thank you so much.
Thank you.